I'm Tim Stapleton, owner of GT Automotive in South Jordan, Utah. Just like to talk a little bit about air conditioning. It's changed quite a bit over the years. We used to use what everybody called Freon, which was R12. They found later on that that was really hard on the environment, on the ozone. So then they went to a product called R134A, and it's a lot easier on the ozone, but still not perfect. And now they have a new one called HCF 1234, and that's even easier on the environment. That was brought about because of the European market was looking for something more eco-friendly, and it's being adopted in some of the brand new cars this year, and so that's something we have to look forward to in the future. But it used to be with the R12 Freon that they would have a sight glass in the system somewhere, and you could see the air bubbles as the Freon would leak out over a period of time, and then you knew you had to charge it back up, and you just charge it up until all the air bubbles were gone. Well, they still sell the newer product, R134A, at some of the parts houses, and people can go in there and buy it and do their own car. But the problem is there's no sight glass, and you don't know when it's full or not. And if you don't have a machine with the pressure gauges and everything to tell you what it's supposed to be, and even with the pressure, you're not very accurate. So what should happen is you completely evacuate the system, and then right here, every car has a tag somewhere on it, and it'll tell you how much. Like here, it says 20 to 23 ounces. So then you know exactly how much Freon to put in it. So even though it only loses a little bit, we always evacuate all of it and then install the proper amount of Freon into it. And then the other thing we do, because the only way you lose Freon or refrigerant is because you have a leak in the system. And so what we do is we always add dye to the system, so that if it comes back later on, whether it takes a day or a week or a year, that Freon with the dye will still be hanging around and we can see it. We'll show you a little bit later on what it looks like, but this is the dye, and it's not too impressive except that when we hit it with a black light, it'll turn a fluorescent greenish yellow, very bright. You can see it a little bit right around that fitting. But we shoot a little of that in there, or else we use the Freon that has it in there already. So the last thing we want to do is put Freon in there without dye, because then if it leaks out, we still don't know where it came from. Now they make electronic testers, but they're not very accurate. And the best way to do it is by putting that fluorescent dye in the system. And you can see even in the sunlight it looks pretty fluorescent. But we'll show you later on under a UV black light that it makes it much easier to spot where it's leaking from. And then we can go in and make that repair, put, again, more of the fluorescent dye in it, evacuate the system, and then recharge it with the R134A or whatever the vehicle came with. And one of the things we like to do is make sure that the condenser and everything is clean. The way an air conditioning works is, for it to get cold on the inside, it has to dissipate the heat on the outside. That's conservation of energy, and that's the only way it can happen. So what we're going to do is make sure that we don't have a bunch of blockage in that condenser keeping the air from flowing by. Because if we do, then it won't have a chance to cool down that charge of Freon. So one of the best ways we found, we use a steam cleaner, which I already did. And then after that, we use a special tool that is an air blower, only instead of blowing air out the side, it blows it, or out the end, it blows it out the side. So we can take this and put it right down in here, and you can see it shooting it on my leg. See all that coming out? So that's all junk in there. That's all junk in there that would keep the charge from cooling back down, so that it'll be cold by the time it gets back into your car. So this part out here is called the condenser. That's where it puts it under pressure. And then when it travels through, it goes through what's called the evaporator, which is down inside of here, back here. And the evaporator works the same way a spray can would work. If you took hairspray or something like that, when you spray it, that it expands, and that can will get cold in your hand after a little while. And Freon has the properties that when you do that, it gets extremely cold, and then you run air across that heater core and or that evaporator, and then that's what makes it feel cold. So there's a couple of ways we can get the dye into the system. We always use refrigerant that has dye in it already. But if we need a little extra dye, or if we're having problems trying to locate a leak, then we can take off one of these fittings, and I won't do it right now, but screw on this fitting, and then we can twist this and we can put in a measured amount of dye into the system, something a little extra so that we'll be able to find it later on. Okay, so now we're going to, because we had to recharge the system, we know that there's some kind of a leak in there, and because we had recharged it once before, we know that there is dye in the system. And just real briefly, the manufacturers have never put dye in the system until just the last year or two, and they've wised up and are starting to do that so that you don't have to pay for evacuate and recharge just to find the problem. So that should be real helpful. So now what we're going to turn off the lights and shoot this this black light. I'm going to put on these glasses because they make it a lot easier to find the leak. You can see where there's dye, yellow dye, leaking out of that hose, so we know we have a bad AC hose. And here's what it looks like going through the glasses. It just accentuates it a little bit so you can see it a little bit easier, gives a little bit more contrast. And at the same time, you want to look all over. A lot of times you'll see some out of these Schrader valves. Sometimes it'll be coming out of those because nobody's cleaned them after they added the Freon. So we always make sure we clean that valve real good. Oh, this thing keeps going out. Clean that valve real good so that if there is any dye in there, it is because it's leaking and not because we left it last time. So you want to run over the whole system, do the condenser, the evaporator as much as you can, and all the lines and everything. But this looks like that's the leak we're looking for. So once we find the leak and then we go ahead and make the repair, then we're going to evacuate it, recharge it. Again, we're going to put dye in it in case something else leaks down the road. It may leak in a week, maybe in a month, maybe in 5 or 6 years, but that dye will still be in the system and we'll be able to find it. The bottom line with air conditioning is, does it get cold or does it not get cold? And you know, it used to be pretty simple back in the day, and now they have computers that control everything, but we can look right here. It says it's 89 degrees. So now we're going to start the car up, turn the air on. It'll take a minute because it doesn't measure the air as much as it measures the objects. But you can see right now it's dropping down nicely. This type of Freon doesn't get quite as cold as the old R12 did at an idle, but it does pretty well, a lot better than they expected it to. And every car is a little bit different, but I suspect if we let this run for a few minutes, we'll be down right around 40 degrees. But it'll just take a little while for it to get there. But yeah, that's good. So the bottom line is, if your air conditioning is really cold and your teeth are chattering when you're going down the road, you don't need to go in and get it checked. It's working just fine. And Freon does not ever have to be replaced. It only has to be replenished. So the only way you lose the Freon is if the system leaks, and then you need to have it tested. And we can do that for you here. We obviously use the dye and the infrared, and we can always, or the ultraviolet, and we can always find the leak. And then make the repairs necessary, and then we also reinstall the ultraviolet leak detection fluid so that if you have another problem years later, we'll be able to find it right away.